Well, my name is Vicki Hendrickson, and this is Jen Entwistle, and we're the co-directors of the festival. And I just want to say that, you know, it takes an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of work to pull this off every year. And so I would like to acknowledge the steering committee who are listed on the back of your program, and I encourage you to look at them and, look at their names and then find them and say, oh, brilliant. And also I want to thank the Newburyport 5-cent Savings Bank, who and the Institution for Savings, both of which are our founding sponsors. We also have foundations that give us money. Oh, that's yours.
You can keep going if you'd like, Vicki.
I'm sorry.
All right, this is my part. In addition, we have a number of charitable foundations who support us, including the Small Foundation and several others who wish to remain anonymous, but we do thank them. And we also thank the Mass Cultural Council, the local cultural councils of Amesbury, Georgetown, Merrimack, Newbury, Newburyport, and West Newbury, and finally our Board of Trustees.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
You're supposed to also say that.
Yeah, I know. Okay, and finally, we want to thank those individuals who answered our appeal letter and sent us a check, and we were grateful to get it, and also the many volunteers who join us every year, and we could not pull this off without all of those people. So thank you. Now it is
Should you
my...
mention the Masonic Hall?
Oh, I didn't mention...
I think we should mention it.
Yeah, the party afterward is at the Masonic Hall. It is not at... It's Greek Easter this weekend, so no Nicholson Hall. Masonic Hall on Green Street. How are we doing?
Good job. That
Thank
was very
you,
good.
thank you. Okay, now we have the proclamation. All right, now I would like to introduce Mayor Donna Holliday, who is going to declare tomorrow Edna St. Vincent Millay Day. Edna could not be here this evening to accept this, so Cindy Dodd, who is the head librarian at the Newburyport Public Library, has generously offered to accept it on her behalf. So please.
Donna Holliday.
Donna, Cindy. Ta-da!
Thank you and good evening, and welcome to another annual literary festival, a wonderful event. And so pleased with Vicki and Jan for all the work that they have done to create this wonderful festival year after year after year. And for me, I get to always kick this off with a proclamation, which is always so exciting. And Vicki told you that you already know who the proclamation is for. So, and our head librarian, or director of our library services, Cynthia Dodd, is here to accept on behalf of Edna. Whereas Edna St. Vincent Millay was born in Rockland, Maine in 1892 and was named for St. Vincent Hospital in New York, where her uncle had received care after a car accident. Her parents divorced in 1900 when Vincent, called Edna by her friends, was 8, and she and her sister spent their childhood in Maine, as well as Newburyport. Whereas her first great poem, Renaissance, was published in an anthology called The Lyric Year in 1912. Upon hearing her recitation of this, an education officer from the YWCA helped her obtain a scholarship to Vassar College. Taking a preparatory course from Barnard College, Vincent entered Vassar in 1913 and graduated with an AB in 1917. And whereas, moving to Greenwich Village, New York, she eventually signed an agreement to work with Vanity Fair, later enjoying a sojourn to Europe from 1920 to 1923. In 1921, Vincent published 2 more plays and a collection of poetry, Second April. In 1923, Malay was honored as the first woman to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. And whereas Malay married Eugen Bossavan and in 1925 bought Steepletop, a 700-acre farmland near Austerlitz, New York. In 1944, Malay suffered a nervous breakdown and was unable to write for 2 years. Caring for her during this time, her husband became ill in 1949 and died of lung cancer. Inconsolable in her widowhood, Vincent died in 1950 alone, sitting at the foot of her staircase. She is buried at Steepletop. Therefore, be it resolved that I, Donna D. Holliday, Mayor of the City of Newburyport, hereby proudly proclaim April 29th as Edna St. Vincent Millay Day in the City of Newburyport. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Enjoy the festival.
Carl Little is a journalist and poet, so he was a natural choice to be in conversation tonight with Daniel Epstein. He's the author of Winslow, Homer, and the Sea, and the watercolor of John Singer Sargent. Carl and his brother David are working on a new book, Art of Acadia, due out in the summer of 2016 to coincide with the centennial of the founding of Acadia National Park. He'll be speaking tomorrow at the Art Association at 1 o'clock about that book, so be sure to be there. Carl also wrote the catalog for the Wendy Turner Retrospective in Portsmouth, which is opening on June 17th. He directed the Public Affairs Office and the Blum Gallery at College of the Atlantic for 8 years before joining the Maine Community Foundation as the Director of Communications and Marketing in 2001. Please welcome Carl Little.
Good evening and welcome. Let me start by thanking Vicki, Jennifer, and Alfred Nicole for inviting me to take part in this conversation tonight. I should note that Alfred and I go back many years to undergraduate days at Dartmouth in the 1970s, and this festival has been the occasion for a long-anticipated reunion. It's wonderful. Alfred told me that this audience is great at asking questions, so I just wanted to put that bee in your bonnet now to think of some questions for our esteemed guest for later on. Daniel Epstein and I have a difficult act to follow. Senator George Mitchell interviewed by Dyke Hendrickson. That was just an incredible conversation. So many things. One of the things that he said, and I think it pertains to our conversation tonight, is he said, life is not lived in a linear fashion. Very true, very true. I should note that Senator Mitchell once rented my mother's house in Soamesville, Maine. He left his message on my mother's voicemail at the end of the summer. Better than Carl Castle. Tonight we're going to talk about Edna St. Vincent Millay. I know that the good people of Newburyport consider Millay one of their own, the Proclamation earlier, as she spent part of her childhood across the river in Salisbury and actually lived briefly in Newburyport. And it seems like a very propitious time to be talking about Millay. There is a new selected poems coming out maybe even this week from Yale. Her birthplace in Rockland, Maine has been purchased and will become an historic literary site soon. And I'm not sure that anyone here in this audience knows this yet, but Millay will appear on the $50 bill. I'm playing the women card there. So enough with the rumors. Let me properly welcome and introduce our special guest, Daniel Mark Epstein. In addition to his 2001 biography of Millay, What Lips My Lips Have Kissed, the love and love poems of Edna St. Vincent Millay, Epstein has written biographies of Bob Dylan, Nat King Cole, Amy Semple McPherson, as well as books on Lincoln and Whitman. He's the author of 9 collections of poetry, most recently Dawn to Twilight, New and Selected Poems, which came out last year from Louisiana State University Press. His poetry has appeared in such publications as the New Yorker Poetry, the Atlantic Monthly, and the Paris and Hudson Reviews. He has also published several collections of essays, short stories, and translations, and has had several plays produced. His story, Star of Wonder, was broadcast on NPR for many years and became a beloved holiday story. Among Daniel's honors and prizes are the Prix de Rome, Guggenheim and NEA fellowships, and the Award for Lifetime Achievement from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Welcome, Daniel Epstein, to the Newburyport Literary Festival 2016.
Thank you. I'm only going to stand here for a minute because I'm not going to make a speech. I just want to thank Carl for those kind words, Alfred Nicole for inviting me here, Quincy Whitney, who first told me about this wonderful festival, and I'm really happy to be here, Jennifer Entwistle, and Vicki Hendrickson. Thanks to all of you, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I think it's a great thing for Malay that she's being honored here, and a great thing for the town. Thank you.
So, Daniel, we're going to talk about Millay tonight, her life, her poetry, her legacy. And one of the things I think that, one of the special things that you brought to that biography is your perspective as a poet yourself, which I think is rare among biographers. So I just wanted to make note of that. And I noted that you've written a number of biographies. And so my first question is, why did you choose Millay? What was it that drew you to her life?
This is my third biography. The first was of Amy Semple McPherson, an evangelist. The second was of Nat King Cole, the great jazz pianist, who did some singing too.
Indeed.
And I wanted to do a literary biography because I started my career as a poet. And so I started casting about for subjects, people that I was interested in who had not had a thorough treatment recently. And this must have been, I guess it was in the late 90s. Trying to remember exactly. I've written so many books, I don't know when I wrote which one. But when I was a boy growing up, my mother was a big fan of poetry. And she was born in 1926. So when she was growing up, Edna St. Vincent Millay was very famous, and her poetry was very available. And she loved Millay, and she read to me a lot of Millay's poetry.
Wow.
Particularly, I remember in particular Renaissance, which of course was the poem that made her famous. One of the few poems in American history that became a really famous poem. She read that aloud to me to a point where I nearly memorized it. The Harp Weaver, that other wonderful magical poem. So anyway, I was fascinated by Millay as a poet. There were basically three questions that drove me to want to write a book about this person. There hadn't been a biography of Millay since 1969. And there were three questions that really haunted me. First of all, who was this girl? She was 19 years old, going on 20, who wrote Renaissance. Who was this person? What made it possible for her to write this great poem at such a young age? So that was a mystery to me. The second was, here's a poet who's written all these wonderful love poems. Are they based on real love affairs? And is it possible to find out who were the partners who inspired these love poems? So there was that. The third question that really animated me was, what happened to her after 1940? She was born in 1892, was famous in the 1920s, wrote great poetry in the 1930s, and virtually disappeared from public view, and didn't produce a lot of important poetry after 1940. So those three questions were enough to really get me fired up and want to write the book.
Yeah, and I remember in your preface, the introduction to the book, that there was some new material that had become available too about her life, some diaries and things that.
Well, virtually her entire archive had gone unexplored from the time of her death until I got my hands on the archive in the 1990s. The reason for that is another biographer had been given permission by the estate to write a biography, and then she proceeded to delay and delay and delay and delay, and finally she lost the right to the material. But during the 20-year period, no other scholar could write about Millay because all of her diaries, all of her letters were still owned by her sister, Norma, and nobody could get at them until a certain period of time had elapsed. And that was the point where I got interested, and I went and spoke to Elizabeth Barnett, who was taking care of the documents, and she gave me permission to go to the Library of Congress, where there were all these filing cabinets of unprocessed material. I mean, it was incredible, just to go into these boxes of letters and diaries.
Amazing.
Very
It's
exciting.
wonderful. So when writing a biography, the author establishes a special relationship with his or her subject. And I just wanted to ask you, can you talk a little bit about how you sort of came to terms with Malay? And I thought we might show a couple of photos of her as sort of a backdrop to sort of help create the narrative. If you could put on the first one there, please.
Oh, the witch.
So this is Millay in Camden in 1910, I believe.
Yeah, this would have been 2 years before she wrote Renaissance. And I begin the book talking about how this was a young woman who, and I think this really pertains to the Newburyport experience. This is a woman whose life was formed, her life, her personality, and her art was formed in adversity. And some of the worst years, some of the cruelest years of her life were spent here. She was here only 4 years, but it was a time of enormous difficulty. Her mother was ill. Her parents had just gotten divorced. She had to take care of her younger sisters. She had a really hard time. And one of the things that she turned to after an attempt at religion in the Congregationalist Church, a wholehearted attempt, by the way, she turned her back on that and turned to sorcery. And this is a picture of her 2 years before she wrote Renaissance, and she's dressed for Halloween, but it's very much in character.
And that's Mount Batty behind her there,
Yeah,
part of the
yeah.
Camden Hills. Next photo.
Oh, and there's the angel. You get very close to these biographical subjects. They become family. I mean, if you spend that much time reading somebody's diaries and letters, and I think that this is just an adorable picture of her right at the time she wrote Renaissance. And she obviously is beaming and full of joy. And,
A child still, but
And still-
incredible. Yeah.
I love that picture.
Next one. I think you call this one Malay Couchon.
Malay Couchon, yeah. I guess she's in her mid-20s, late 20s, and very attractive and very. She had many lovers, and there were a lot of men and women who were in love with Millay. This picture reminds me of one particular story. When she was in her late 20s, she had so many suitors, didn't have time for them all, so she began to double them up. And the most famous ménage à trois was John Peele Bishop, very good poet, and Edmund Wilson, the great critic and novelist, good novelist too. And they both fell in love at the same time with Millay, who she was a very busy woman with her writing and So anyway, they ended up in bed together, and John Peele Bishop and Edmund Wilson spent a lot of time arguing over who had the better half.
Yeah.
Malay Couchon.
I think we better go to the next one.
Well, that is Eugen Boissevin with Millay, and they've just gotten married. And she was very ill at the time he was courting her, and he was the only one who realized just how ill she was, and got her the proper medical care. And he was just an extraordinary man. He was born in 1880, so he was 12 years older than she, and a Dutchman, man of the world, businessman, also very well read, And he was really the man of her dreams. That was the man that she always wanted to marry, and she married him. He had been married previously to a very famous suffrage leader, Inez Mulholland, and they were married around 1913, 1914. She literally died at the podium. She was so full of energy and passion, she didn't eat or sleep or do what she was supposed to do. And anyway, he was married to her, and who could follow Inez Mulholland but Edna St. Vincent Millay? And they had a very, very good marriage. He was devoted to her, and she was devoted to him. A very complicated marriage, as you'll find out if you read my book.
Very complicated.
Very complicated. He knew what he was getting into.
But he did. He was incredibly tolerant. Is the only way I can put it. And do you think this was at Steepletop?
I think so. Yeah. Although I don't recognize.
Oh, actually, yeah, maybe.
I don't really recognize it, but it could be Steepletop.
Which was her home later on in New York. Next one.
I'd never seen this image, and I don't know who took it.
Found it online. And
this is Malay in 1940, and I don't know. I just think there's so much character in that face, and so much strength and vulnerability. She's obviously under the square, Washington.
Where Bernie Sanders was.
Yeah,
just
where
a
Bernie
couple weeks ago.
Sanders was.
Yep.
Well dressed, always, impeccably, well, not always impeccably dressed, but expensively dressed, and haunted by 1940, haunted by all sorts of demons.
Yeah. Next one. This is the last one.
Yeah, this is Malay towards the end of her life. She died in 1950, and by then she was hopelessly addicted to morphine and alcohol. So one of the quick answers to the questions that led me into the book, one of the reasons why it's not the real reason, but one of the explanations for why she didn't produce as well and why she became a recluse late in life is because she was a drug addict.
Yeah, and just we'll put up the last one, which is, there we go. So another question for you, Daniel, is what surprised you most about Millay's life story? And I've kind of got a motive here because I know what really interested me most. I mean, what surprised me most. But I'd be curious as to, was there a part of her biography? What I'm thinking of is her racetrack, her love of her connection with racetracks, which I had no idea existed.
I don't think anybody did. I think I was the first person to read those letters, even though they'd been available to two other people. She was a gambler. She and Boissevin both were gamblers, and she was, by the 1930s, she was quite wealthy. She'd made a lot of money from her books. Boissevin had made a lot of money as a merchant. And they bought racehorses, and they got lucky. They bought a horse called Chaladon, and Malay, who seemed to be able to do anything she put her hand to, she took over the training of this horse in the late 30s, and the horse became one of the greatest horses of its time and made hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, she didn't want her public to know that. What kind of thing would this be? A poet with racehorses making that kind of money? I mean, it just wouldn't make any sense. So it was kept secret for a long time, and that was a surprise.
One of my favorite anecdotes, if I could read this from your biography, relates to that and actually makes the connection between the racehorses and her poetry. This is her secretary, Helen Bruce, who accompanied Malay on reading tours, recalled the mnemonic device the poet used to warm up her voice and memory before her recitals. Pacing up and down backstage, Malay would recite all the Kentucky Derby winners from 1875 forward. Aristides, Vagrant, Baden-Baden, Daystar, Lord Murphy, Fonzo, Hindu, Apollo. The horses' names made a beautiful music. The poet once wrote to her friend, Audie James, "If I wasn't so busy finding out what horses won the races in Maryland today, I might have time to write." Anyway, just to...
Yeah, this is a remarkable person, and certainly that was a surprise. But the real surprise to me in getting to know this person was just how much she suffered in her life, particularly as a child. Writers have all kinds of stories. Some have very happy childhoods. Dylan Thomas had a very happy childhood. Robert Lowell probably had a very happy childhood. And the list can go on. And then some writers have terrible childhoods. One or the other doesn't necessarily make a good poet or a bad poet. But Millay had a particularly grueling time of it. So learning about her life in Newburyport, the coldest winter, one of the coldest winters on record, was 1904. She came here in 1901. After her parents separated, she came down from Rockland. Cora Bizard, Malay, left the husband, came down here with her 3 daughters, who had typhoid. She happened to be a nurse, so she was able to get them through that. They came here and then went from family to family member in this area. For a while they were on Ring Island, which is now, yeah, they were there. They went to school there for a little while. They finally got a house over on Lime Street, and it was a bungalow on Lime Street. And 1903 was terrible. 1904 was one of the worst winters in memory. And Cora was too proud to take the free coal that was offered by the city. So they ended up with, lime from somewhere, and next door, the house, there was not a very good neighborhood, Lime Street, in those days. And William Lloyd Garrison lived right around the corner on School Street. But anyway, there was a house falling down next door to theirs, and before Cora went to work every morning as a nurse, she'd grab some shingles off the house, she'd throw them over the fence, and the girls would use that for fuel for the fire. And I believe that The Harp Weaver, which is this marvelous poem about, this little boy freezing in the house, and the mother weaves out of this harp with a woman's head, she weaves these clothes for him. I think that house and that experience is what inspired that particular poem. Anyway, then eventually, after 1904, they went up to Camden. The mother traveled all over the place, and Edna was in the position of taking care of her younger siblings from the time she was 12 years old until she was 21 years old. She was Cinderella. It was really, really hard for her. So discovering that. And the other thing that, to me, the deepest and most distressing discovery was her ruthlessness in the love affair before she married Boissevin, and probably even after that, but certainly before, when she was in her 20s, she was cruel to these men who were in love with her. She broke up marriage after marriage, and they're just horrible stories, and that was a big surprise to me. It was nothing to prepare me for that.
Mm. So in your biography, you paint a remarkable portrait of Millay. You also make a very strong case for her poetry, whose reputation has waxed and waned over the years. And I just wonder if you could give us your argument for the importance of her work.
It's a big question.
It's a big question, yeah.
I think she's our greatest love poet, America's greatest love poet. I think that I make that argument in the book. The other, particularly in the 20th century, there may be greater poets. Certainly you could make an argument that T.S. Eliot's a greater poet, Robert Frost is a greater poet. But in terms of writing poetry, lyric love poetry, particularly erotic lyrics, nobody can touch her. There just isn't anybody. H.D. Is at her best. At her best, is that good. William Carlos Williams has some beautiful love poems. But if I had to choose one love poet in the American tradition, she would be right up there with Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. There are a number of reasons why I think she's greater than either of those in that particular category. So we can talk about that. The other thing is, as a technician, this is where the story becomes very complicated and fascinating at the same time. Ezra Pound, who had such intelligent things to say about the history of poetry and poetic technique, might have used Millay as a model of perfection, classical perfection in poetry. But he didn't ever. There was so much jealousy. She was famous. She was famous. She had an audience. So she didn't get the attention of the modernists, but she was a remarkable Latinist. The poems, from the very beginning, the poems are just remarkably well made. And so there's that whole technical thing going on.
Yeah, and we thought actually, just to bring Millay into the room, we would play a couple of recordings of her reading two of her poems. And if we could cue the first one is Love is All.
Love is not all.
Love is not all. Oof. Always looking on the bright side of things.
Love is not all. Love is not all. It is not meat, nor drink, nor slumber, nor a roof against the rain, nor yet a floating spar to men that sink and rise and sink and rise and sink again. Love cannot fill the thickened lung with breath, nor clean the blood, nor set the fractured bone. Yet many a man is making friends with death even as I speak, for lack of love alone. It well may be that in a difficult hour, pinned down by pain and moaning for release, or nagged by want past resolution's power, I might be driven to sell your love for peace, or trade the memory of this night for food. It well may be. I do not think I would.
Whew.
Hear that accent, that Maine accent? It's really interesting. I was talking to Carl a little bit, or emailing him a little bit about the level of artifice there. She was a stage actress when she was a young woman, very accomplished, and the level of artifice is very high in that. It doesn't sound like somebody who's just speaking to you, and that fascinates me. That it's so stagey.
Yeah.
I mean, I could read the poem to you, and it would probably mean more. But it's wonderful to hear, that the resonance and the fact that she is deliberately emphasizing the music in the poem, the vowel music, the meter. She is a great technician, and the recording does a good job of reproducing that.
Yeah, and let's just have one more, please. This is Recuerdo.
We were very tired. We were very merry. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. It was bare and bright and smelled like a stable. But we looked into a fire. We leaned across a table. We lay on a hilltop underneath the moon, and the whistles kept blowing, and the dawn came soon. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. And you ate an apple, and I ate a pear, from a dozen of each we had bought somewhere. And the sky went warm, and the wind came cold, and the sun rose dripping, a bucket full of gold. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. We hailed, "Good morrow, mother," to a shawl-covered head, and bought a morning paper, which neither of us read. And she wept, "God bless you," for the apples and pears. And we gave her all our money but our subway fares.
That's one of my favorite poems of hers, and it's a little masterpiece of metrics. It reminds me of "I shall arise and go now and go to Innisfree." It's a test pattern of vowels, of vowel music, and one of the most inventive pieces of. I've taught this a lot in courses on technique because the prosody is so sophisticated.
I think that was written when she was living in the Village, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And I keep thinking, is the ferry the Staten Island ferry?
It is. It's the real,
Such a wonderful evocation of that.
Yeah.
Well, we also wanted to read a couple of poems. Daniel, if you want to, there were two that you had selected. "Euclid Alone Has Looked on Beauty Bare."
Yeah, I think I'm going to read that second.
Okay.
This is going to be interesting because you've just heard that very theatrical voice, and now you're going to hear these two guys just
just us guys. Yeah.
Okay, this is what lips my lips have kissed, and where and why. A sonnet, and it's a Petrarchan sonnet, and most of her greatest sonnets are Shakespearean. So it's interesting. This is definitely one of her greatest sonnets, and it's Petrarchan, which is more difficult exercise. What lips my lips have kissed, and where and why, I have forgotten, and what arms have lain under my head till morning. But the rain is full of ghosts tonight that tap and sigh upon the glass and listen for reply. And in my heart there stirs a quiet pain for unremembered lads that not again will turn to me at midnight with a cry. Thus in the winter stands the lonely tree, nor knows what birds have vanished one by one, yet knows its boughs more silent than before. I cannot say what loves have come and gone. I only know that summer sang in me a little while, that in me sings no more.
Beautiful. Sure. So, coming from Maine, I did want to read one of her Maine sonnets. This is sonnet number 36 from Fatal Interview, published in 1931. And it's often referenced as the Matinicus poem, as it references this very remote island. It's even further off the coast of Maine than Monhegan, if you can imagine. And I've actually been to a house on Matinicus Island where the poem is inscribed on a board around the top of a room in the living room. It's quite amazing. But and I did want, this is from the new selected from Yale, and they have some nice annotations, but I wish they'd asked me about this one because there's a reference in here to dahlia tubers. And I just want you to know that there is the Matinicus Red Dahlia Society, and it has been going on since 1906, and certainly Malay would have known about it. Hearing your words and not a word among them tuned to my liking, on a salty day when inland woods were pushed by winds that flung them hissing to leeward like a ton of spray, I thought how off Matinicus the tide came pounding in, came running across the gut, while from the rock the warning whistle cried, and children whimpered and the doors blew shut, there in the autumn when the men go forth. With slapping skirts the island women stand in gardens stripped and scattered, peering north, with dahlia tubers dripping from the hand. The wind of their endurance, driving south, flattened your words against your speaking mouth.
Tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What a poem. Malay had a rigorous intellect. She was a fine mathematician, probably one of the best Latinists ever at Vassar, and read a lot of philosophy. And by the time she writes Renaissance, she knows her Pascal inside and out. She knows her Descartes inside and out. Those are the kinds of things that are informing that poem. And this poem is called Euclid Alone Has Looked on Beauty Bare. And we talked a lot about the erotic element in Malay. Well, this is turning the erotic on its head and thinking of beauty in the abstract. Euclid alone has looked on beauty bare. Let all who prate of beauty hold their peace and lay them prone upon the earth and cease to ponder on themselves, the while they stare at nothing, intricately drawn nowhere in shapes of shifting lineage. Let geese gabble and hiss, but heroes seek release from dusty bondage into luminous air. O blinding hour, O holy, terrible day, when first the shaft into his vision shone of light anatomized. Euclid alone has looked on beauty bare. Fortunate they who, though once only, and then but far away, have heard her massive sandal set on stone.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you, you talked about how she kind of fell off in her later in her life. She did a number of political poems. She protested against Sacco and Vanzetti, not against, but for their release. She received a lot of very nasty reviews, and it seems to me, and it's not obviously a generalization, but it seems to me that it was love that really inspired some of her greatest poetry, and that sometimes politics is not the best inspiration. And I'm actually going to quote you here. It's a great poem of yours called Iraq, where you say, "I know the human voice, gruff on the battleground, viaticum, the widow's cry. Among those, there is no place for political poetry, which being both is neither." I just wonder if you could say something about that, the getting into, a poet getting into politics, shall we say.
It reminds me of, what your question reminds me of a poem of Yeats, on being asked to write a political poem, when he says, we have no gift to set a statesman right. And the idea of, he talks about meddling. He has had enough of meddling. The poet has had enough of meddling, who contents a young, I'm paraphrasing that, a young girl in the indolence of her youth, or an old man on a winter's night. I guess personally my feeling is that political poetry is very, very difficult to write. There have been some great political poems, but Millay did not write them. And actually, she was only involved. She was involved in that Sacco and Vanzetti demonstration at the trial, but that was a rare instance for her. She got a huge amount of attention for it. So everybody wants to know about it. I get letters from scholars who, can't you tell us more about Millay's politics? And she just happened to be there that day because some friends were involved in it. But she didn't write very good political poetry, and I think during the Second World War she wrote this radio play called The Rape of Lidice. It was on the radio, but you have to remember her husband was Dutch, and she was very, very concerned about what was going on. So,
yeah, I do want to leave time for some questions, but. I did want to ask you, what are you working on now?
Well, I just finished. I finished a book about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin and his son. His son was the last Tory governor of New Jersey, and the most influential loyalist in America. And they had a very rich, intimate relationship. And they fell apart, and they never reconciled. And so the story of these two men is a very interesting story. And that'll be published about a year from now. And I've actually been writing a memoir.
Terrific.
About my family.
And so, as a final thing, I know you're going to be reading tomorrow with Jay Perini, and I thought, would you mind giving us a little sneak preview of what you're going to be reading tomorrow?
Sure. Ask a poet to read his poems.
Yeah,
sure.
I figured.
Yeah, this is a poem. It's a love poem, but it's also it's about education. And I haven't done a whole lot of teaching, and maybe the reason I haven't is because I always feel like I'm learning much more from my students than they are from me. And this is kind of about that dynamic. It's called Helen. Tell us a love story, pleaded the class in chorus. Our lessons are all done. Don't lecture or bore us, they prattled, except for one, Helen, whose gaze looked lost in the maze of willow branches. The girl the boys liked most for the faraway blue of her eyes and brown hair straight as rain. Tell us a love story, please, they begged the teacher again. He frowned and longed for the bell, saying, all the love stories I know end in heartache or death. Then Helen, from the back row, called at last from her daydream in the voice of an innocent lover, tell us a love story anyway, and stop before it is over.
That's wonderful. That's just fabulous. So let's open it up to questions. And I'm looking out here against the lights here. Sure, you?
I have two very practical questions. How long did you actually did it take to do the research? And was her handwriting legible?
Great question.
Yeah, those are really good questions. It took me the actual reading of the documents. When I'm working on a book, I tend to go back and plug in stuff. But the actual beginning research took about 4 months. But it was 4 months of every day going. I live in Baltimore, and I would go every day to the Library of Congress, and I would be the first person in the reading room and the last person to leave. And I did that for 4 months. And I've learned, because of what I do for a living, I'm pretty good at reading handwriting. Malay's handwriting is very interesting. I mean, if you studied handwriting, her handwriting flattens out. Her handwriting starts out, the way most of us write. By the time she was in her 40s, it's like shrunk.
Wow.
And it becomes more difficult. But I never had a problem reading her handwriting. What was the other question? Those are.
Sure.
Any idea why she never had children? Was that a choice, or that with all the sexual activity?
Did you all hear that?
Perception wasn't that.
Could you hear the question? Okay, the question was, do you have any idea why she didn't have children with all the sexual activity and so on? I know for sure she was pregnant once, and it was a period where she was having an affair with a French musician. She was living in England. Her mother was there, and supposedly her mother induced a miscarriage. Her mother was a nurse and knew how to do that. I'm pretty sure it was a choice. Although after a certain point, she was in really very frail health. She had a lot of problems with her intestines. But I think it was a choice.
Yes?
I'm struck by what you were saying about the difference between your expectations of Millay and her personality Byronic, poetical persona that's very much so, like we would all sort of expect a poet to have wonderful sexual liaisons and use drugs and so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the constructed Malay and the private Malay, and how much she was in control? Like, to what extent was the public persona of Malay itself an artistic product of her poetical self?
That's a really good question. I don't know if you could hear that. It was a pretty complicated question. There were no women poets like Millay before Millay. I mean, there was Sappho, and then there was Millay. Millay was the Byron. I mean, she was the Byron of her age, and she was a woman. And she didn't plan that. I mean, there was nothing forced about it. There was nothing artificial about that. That's who she was. And the poetry reflected her lifestyle. And then the poetry went out there, and it was just gobbled up. She became famous. She was like a celebrity. And so as far as the constructed Millay, she was not manipulative in the way that Madonna, for instance, is. Madonna really controls the way people perceive her. And Millay was not self-conscious in that way. There's a certain point where she protected herself, but it was real. I mean, she really was that person. And one of the reasons why we expect poets to behave like that, whether they're men or women in America, is because of Edna St. Vincent Millay.
Yeah, we were talking about it. It's just it's remarkable that, I mean, she went on reading tours. She was incredibly well known. And what's the equivalent today? And we were...
Well, the equivalent, it's a very good question. We were talking about this, why aren't there celebrity poets now? And there are celebrity poets. The rappers are, there's some of them are incredibly skillful. They're really doing poetry and they're really famous. And in my time, I don't consider the rappers to be of my generation. They're really not. But in the 1960s, we saw something similar happen with Bob Dylan and the Beatles. And Bob Dylan is a serious poet. He's written some remarkable poems, and became celebrated because they were also songs that were on the radio, or on records.
Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about her relationships with women?
Beg your pardon?
Can you talk a little bit about her relationships with women?
Yes, there's a lot in my book about that, and there's a lot in the letters. Has anybody published the letters? All the letters.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
no.
She was very, very interested. She had very good friends who were women, and she had lesbian relationships beginning actually before Vassar, even when she was a teenager. In fact, one of the parts of the detective work that I did when I was writing, I was interested in finding out exactly where she was when she wrote Renaissance. She wrote Renaissance in two parts, and in the middle of it, she went to visit her father, who she hadn't seen in years, and he was living in some other part of the state, and while she was there, she had an affair with a young woman, and then she came back and wrote the rest of Renaissance. And as far as I know, she continued to have, now and then, liaisons, erotic liaisons with women pretty much all of her life.
And brought one of her lovers home from Vassar, I think, came to
I think you're right, yeah.
Came to Camden, yeah.
Did she read Virginia Woolf? It's hard to imagine she didn't, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. She didn't mention, as far as I know, never mentioned Virginia Woolf. Yes?
Yep.
What role editors play. They don't edit that much anymore the way they used to. Did she deal with one editor in particular or one publishing house, because it was more common in those days?
Cass Canfield was her editor at Harper, and it was just Harper in those days. I can't think of an editor, a publishing house editor, who had serious input. She had friends who were poets, Eleanor Wiley was a poet, and I'm sure Edmund Wilson read poems of hers and made suggestions. But I don't think she had a publishing house editor, at least to my knowledge, who was that important. Now, you know, she also wrote a lot of prose. She wrote under the name Nancy Boyd, and I'm sure that the editors at the magazines, Cosmopolitan or whatever they were, Vanity Fair, I'm sure they were helpful.
I know that she was very protective of her own texts. There's a story in your book about someone suggesting some changes and she getting
Oh yeah, she didn't want
furious.
anybody messing with her copy.
Yeah, sure.
Did you know Dorothy Parker?
She was with Dorothy Parker at the trial in Braintree, the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. So they certainly knew each other. I don't know if they hung out together, but they knew each other for sure.
One more? Sure.
I want to ask you about Vassar and that transformation. It seems to me what the first artist who she became was being in that school at that time and the culture and intellectual.
Oh, that's a big subject. I know that she had to do some remedial work before she went. She had to go to Barnard during the summer because she didn't have enough math and science or whatever. So at first she felt kind of out of her league at Vassar, but she very quickly established herself as a Latinist, and she was good at math and of course literature too. But the thing about Millay at Vassar that's so funny is she was famous. When she was at Vassar, she was like, it would be like Bob Dylan going to college, after making 3 or 4 records. She was really famous. So she would break the rules, she would violate the curfew or whatever, and the president would call her into the office and he'd, what am I going to do with you? And she'd look at him and say, well, throw me out. They were not going to throw Edna St. Vincent Millay out of school.
Yeah, I mean, she almost didn't graduate, right? I mean, there was...
That's right, yeah.
came
No,
right
it's a
up to
very
the-
dramatic story. But, the question, did she have mentors at Vassar? I don't remember her having... I'm sure there were professors who were important to her at Vassar, but she worked very hard. She did good work while she was there, so I'm sure it was important to her. But she was also getting published more than the entire faculty put together. Yeah.
Sure. One more? Or?
Forgive me because I have not read your book yet, which I'm looking forward to doing. But were you able to zero in on the influences or the catalyst for the breakdown?
Her mother's death was huge. She was really bonded to her mother. Her mother died in 1931, and I think she was, in 1931, Millay would have been in her late 30s. She didn't handle aging well. She'd been this very, very attractive young woman, and she was very upset about getting older, and she was drinking too much, and she had illnesses, and when her mother died, she really fell apart. She was never quite the same after that. But it's a long story, why did she break down? And a very interesting story, complicated.
So one more. Go ahead.
My question was, you mentioned I think that her mom was a nurse in Newburyport?
Yes.
Where was she a nurse in Newburyport?
I think it was in Newburyport. I mean, she may have traveled around the area as a nurse, but she wasn't like in a hospital. She would go different places and take care of people who needed care.
Well, this has been great, Daniel. Thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.